The dust swirled around Katherine Palmer's boots as she stood before the settlement office window, clutching the deed to her father's land, claimed so tightly the paper crumpled at the edges, her heart hammering against her ribs because everything she had left in this world depended on what happened in the next few minutes. The year was 1878, and Yankton, South Dakota, had grown from a rough collection of tents along the Missouri River into a proper territorial capital, with wooden sidewalks and brick buildings that cast long shadows in the afternoon sun. Katherine had traveled 3 weeks by stagecoach from Illinois after receiving the telegram about her father's death, arriving with nothing but 2 trunks of belongings and the legal papers that proved she was Harrison Palmer's sole heir. Her father had filed his homestead claim 5 years earlier, working the land through brutal winters and scorching summers, building a cabin and barn with his own hands, planting wheat and corn that actually grew despite the harsh Dakota soil. He had fulfilled every requirement of the Homestead Act, or so Katherine believed until she walked into the land office that morning. The settlement agent, a portly man named Cornelius Thatcher with sweat stains under his arms and tobacco juice staining his gray beard, barely glanced at her documents before pushing them back across the counter. His thick fingers left smudges on the papers her father had guarded so carefully. "Cannot process this claim," Thatcher said, his voice flat and dismissive as he reached for another file on his cluttered desk. Katherine felt the floor tilt beneath her. "I do not understand. My father completed all 5 years. He built structures, cultivated the land, lived there continuously except for necessary trips to town. Everything is documented." Thatcher sighed heavily, as though her mere presence exhausted him. "The law is clear, Miss Palmer. A woman cannot hold a homestead claim unless she is the head of household. You are unmarried, therefore you do not qualify. The land reverts to the federal government for reassignment." The words hit her like a physical blow. Katherine gripped the edge of the counter to steady herself. "My father earned that land. I am his legal heir." "Should have had a son," Thatcher said with a shrug that made Katherine's blood boil. "Or you should have a husband. Those are the rules. Now, if you will excuse me, I have actual claimants waiting." Katherine looked around the office, desperately seeking support, but the other men waiting on the wooden benches along the wall either looked away or studied their boots with sudden, intense interest. No one would stand up for a woman alone. That was clear enough. "There must be something I can do," Katherine said, hating the tremor in her voice. She would not cry in front of this horrible man. She would not give him that satisfaction. "Get married," Thatcher said. "Bring your husband in with these papers and we can transfer the claim to his name. Otherwise, you need to vacate the property within 30 days. He stamped a document with unnecessary force, the sound echoing through the office like a judge's gavel. Katherine gathered her papers with shaking hands, her vision blurring at the edges. 5 years of her father's life. All the letters he had written describing his dreams of building something lasting, something he could pass down to his daughter so she would never have to depend on anyone. All of it meant nothing because she lacked a husband. She pushed through the office door and stood on the wooden sidewalk, the spring sunshine mocking her despair. Yankton stretched out before her, busy with afternoon commerce. Wagons rolled past carrying supplies, women in calico dresses moved between shops, and somewhere a blacksmith's hammer rang against an anvil in steady rhythm. Life continued as though Katherine's world had not just collapsed. That did not sound promising. Katherine turned to find a man leaning against the hitching post. One boot crossed over the other in a casual stance that suggested he had been waiting there a while. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that curled slightly over his collar and eyes the color of creek water in summer, that particular shade of green-brown that changed depending on the light. He wore typical cowboy attire, worn denim pants, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, a leather vest, and a gun belt slung low on his hips. His hat hung down his back by its cord, and there was dust on his clothes that spoke of long days on the trail. "Were you eavesdropping?" Katherine asked, too wrung out to manage proper indignation. "Could not help overhearing through the open window," the man said, gesturing to the settlement office behind her. "Thatcher has a voice that carries, especially when he is being a self-righteous bastard." He straightened and offered a slight nod that might have been a bow in more civilized circumstances. "Name is Porter Preston. Most folks just call me Preston." Katherine knew she should walk away. Proper young women did not converse with strange cowboys on the street. But proper young women also did not travel alone across half the country or attempt to claim homesteads in Dakota territory, so perhaps the rules of propriety no longer applied to her life. "Katherine Palmer," she said. "And you are correct. It was not promising. It was devastating, in fact." Preston's expression softened with something that looked like genuine sympathy. "Your father's claim. He died 6 weeks ago. Heart gave out while he was plowing the north field." Katherine's throat tightened, but she forced herself to continue. "I came as quickly as I could, but apparently that does not matter. The agent says I cannot hold the claim without a husband." "Thatcher is technically correct about the law," Preston said slowly, "but that does not make it right. Your father did the work. The land should be yours." "Should and is are very different things, Mr. Preston." Katherine looked down at the papers in her hands. "I have 30 days to vacate. Then I suppose I will return to Illinois and find employment as a seamstress or shop girl, if I am fortunate." She did not mention her other, darker fear that without means or family, she might end up in far worse circumstances. Preston was quiet for a moment, studying her with an intensity that made Katherine self-conscious. She was aware of how she must look, travel-worn and dusty, her dark hair escaping its pins, her gray dress rumpled from the stagecoach journey, her face probably showing every bit of her exhaustion and heartbreak. "What if you had a husband?" Preston asked suddenly. Katherine blinked. "I beg your pardon. What if you walked back into that office with a husband? Thatcher said he would process the claim then, correct?" "Yes, but I fail to see how that helps me," Katherine said sharply. "I cannot conjure a husband from thin air, Mr. Preston." "You could if I volunteered for the position." The street noise seemed to fade as Katherine stared at this stranger who had just proposed marriage as casually as one might suggest sharing a cup of coffee. "You cannot be serious." "Why not?" Preston shifted his weight, his expression earnest now rather than casual. "You need a husband to keep your land. I need a place to settle down. I have been working cattle drives for 8 years, following the herds from Texas to Kansas and back again. I have money saved but no land and no prospects. Seems like we could help each other." Katherine's mind spun. "You know nothing about me. I know nothing about you. This is insane." "Maybe," Preston agreed. "But is it any more insane than losing your inheritance because of a stupid law?" "Look, I am not proposing a real marriage, just a legal arrangement. We go to the courthouse, sign the papers, take them to Thatcher, and get your land claim properly filed. After that, we figure out what comes next." "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Katherine asked suspiciously. "What do you gain?" Preston rubbed the back of his neck, looking almost embarrassed. "Honestly, I am tired, Miss Palmer. Tired of sleeping on the ground, tired of eating dust, tired of moving from place to place with nothing to show for it. I heard Thatcher dismissing you through that window, and I thought about how many times I have seen men get things handed to them just because they are men, while capable women get turned away. It made me angry. And then I thought, maybe I could actually do something about it this one time. Katherine wanted to dismiss him as crazy or mock him for such an outlandish suggestion, but there was something in his eyes, a sincerity that seemed genuine. And God help her, what choice did she have? Return to Illinois in defeat? Watch her father's dream get handed over to some stranger who did nothing to earn it? If we did this, Katherine said carefully, it would be a business arrangement, nothing more. Understood completely. The house has 2 rooms. You would have your space and I would have mine. That works for me. And if either of us wants to dissolve the arrangement later, we do so amicably. Preston nodded. We can write up terms if you want, make it all official and clear. Katherine knew she should take more time to think this through, to consider all the implications and potential disasters. But the 30-day deadline loomed in her mind, and the thought of losing her father's land made her chest ache with grief and fury. Sometimes desperation made people bold. The courthouse is 2 blocks east, Katherine heard herself say. The clerk should still be there. Preston's face broke into a smile that transformed his features from merely handsome to genuinely striking. Then let us go claim your inheritance, Miss Palmer. They walked side by side down the wooden sidewalk, neither speaking as they navigated past other pedestrians and around a dog sleeping in a patch of sunshine. Katherine's heart pounded so loudly she was certain Preston could hear it. Was she really about to marry a complete stranger? This morning she had been worried about the land claim. She had not expected her father's death to upend every aspect of her life so completely. The courthouse was a 2-story brick building with white-trimmed windows and an American flag snapping in the wind above its entrance. Inside, the air was cooler and smelled of paper and ink. A clerk with spectacles perched on his nose looked up from his desk as they entered. "Help you folks?" he asked in a nasal voice. "We need a marriage license," Preston said before Katherine could lose her nerve. The clerk pulled out the appropriate forms and dipped his pen in ink. "Names: Porter Samuel Preston and Katherine Ann Palmer," Preston supplied, and Katherine felt a strange jolt at hearing their names linked together like that. The clerk asked standard questions: their ages, which Katherine learned Preston was 26 to her 23, their places of birth, their parents' names. He filled out the forms with careful penmanship, then looked up over his spectacles. "You need witnesses. Got anyone in mind?" Katherine had not thought that far ahead. She knew no one in Yankton except the horrible Thatcher. Preston glanced around the empty office, then stepped to the door and looked outside. A moment later he returned with an older couple who had been passing by. "Beg your pardon, but would you folks mind witnessing a wedding?" Preston asked with such charming politeness that the woman actually smiled. "Of course, young man," she said. "How lovely! Congratulations to you both." Katherine managed a weak smile as the clerk prepared the final documents. This was happening. This was actually happening. In less than an hour she had gone from rejected claimant to bride-to-be, and she did not know whether to laugh or cry at the absurdity of it all. "Place your right hands together," the clerk instructed, sounding bored by the routine. Katherine's hand was cold when Preston took it, but his was warm and steady, his calloused palm rough against her skin. The clerk recited the basic legal requirements, asked if they each consented to the marriage, received their affirmative answers, and declared them legally wed in the eyes of the territory of Dakota. Just like that. No ceremony, no celebration, no family present. Just a few words spoken in a dusty office with 2 kind strangers as witnesses. The clerk handed them their marriage certificate, accepted Preston's payment of $2, and they were done. Outside, Katherine stared at the document in her hands. "I am married," she said aloud, testing the words. "We both are," Preston agreed. He looked slightly dazed himself, as though the reality was just settling in. "Should we go see Thatcher?" Katherine straightened her shoulders. "Yes, let us go see Thatcher." This time when Katherine entered the land office, she walked differently, with her head high and Preston beside her. Thatcher looked up with annoyance when she approached his counter again. "I told you the requirements," he started to say. Katherine placed the marriage certificate on the counter with deliberate precision. "I have met your requirements. This is my husband, Porter Preston. We would like to file the transfer of my father's homestead claim to our joint ownership." Thatcher's jaw actually dropped. He picked up the marriage certificate, examined it closely as though searching for forgery, then looked from Katherine to Preston and back again. "This is dated today." "Yes," Katherine said sweetly. "You were quite clear about what was needed, so I procured it." Preston stepped closer, not threateningly, but enough to make his presence firmly known. "Is there a problem with the paperwork, Mr. Thatcher? Everything appears to be in order." Thatcher's face reddened, but he had been trapped by his own requirements. He shuffled through Katherine's father's original documents with far less confidence than he had shown earlier. "I suppose everything is technically correct," he muttered. "I will need to file the transfer forms. That will be $3. Preston produced the money while Thatcher grudgingly prepared the necessary paperwork. The agent's pen scratched across the forms with obvious reluctance, but he could not deny their legal right. When he finally stamped the documents and handed over the updated claim papers, Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. Her father's land was safe. "Thank you," she said to Thatcher with icy politeness, though the gratitude was not for him. Outside, Katherine finally let out the breath she had been holding. "We did it," she whispered. "The land is secured." "Our land," Preston said quietly. "According to those papers, I am now part owner of a homestead. That is a strange feeling." Katherine turned to face him fully, really looking at the man she had just married. In the golden afternoon light, she could see the lines around his eyes that came from squinting into sun and distance, the scar on his chin that spoke of some past injury, the capable strength in his frame. He was essentially a stranger, and yet they were now legally bound. "I suppose we should head out to the property," Katherine said. "It is about an hour's ride north of town. Do you have a horse?" Preston nodded toward the livery stable. "A good mare named Copper. Your father did not have horses." "He had two, but I think the neighbor has been caring for them since the funeral. I arrived on the stagecoach just this morning." Katherine realized with some embarrassment that she had very little practical information. "I have not actually seen the homestead yet. My father's lawyer gave me directions and the key to the cabin." "Then we best get your trunks from wherever you left them and head out before it gets dark," Preston said practically. "We can sort out the details as we go." Katherine had left her belongings at the boarding house where she had planned to stay while settling her father's affairs. They collected her 2 trunks, and Preston arranged for a wagon to transport everything. He paid for the wagon rental and the boarding house room Katherine had not even used, waving away her protests about the expense. "We are partners now," he said simply. "Partners help each other." As they drove the wagon north out of Yankton, following the rutted road that paralleled the Missouri River before cutting inland through rolling prairie, Katherine tried to process everything that had happened. This morning, she had been alone and terrified. Now she sat beside a husband she had known for less than 2 hours, heading toward a home she had never seen, to begin a life she could not have imagined when she woke up. "Tell me about the cattle drives," Katherine said eventually, needing to fill the silence with something other than her own spinning thoughts. "What is that like?" Preston was quiet for a moment, his hands steady on the reins as the wagon wheels crunched over the dirt road. Brutal, mostly. Beautiful sometimes. You spend months moving several thousand head of cattle from Texas ranches up to the railheads in Kansas. Wichita, Abilene, Dodge City, those are the big markets. The cattle get shipped east from there to feed Chicago and New York. That sounds like difficult work, Katherine said. It is. You are in the saddle from before dawn until after dark. You eat dust all day, sleep on the ground at night, and pray you do not run into trouble from weather or rustlers or a dozen other things that can go wrong. But there is something about it too, the openness of it, being part of something big and important, or at least it felt that way when I was younger. Preston glanced at her. Now it just feels exhausting. I want to wake up in the same place every morning. I want to build something that lasts. That is what my father wanted, Katherine said softly. He worked in a factory in Illinois for 20 years, breathing lint and noise, coming home exhausted every night. When the Homestead Act passed, he saw a chance for something better. He took it even though everyone said he was too old to start over. He was brave, Preston said. It takes courage to change your whole life. Katherine smiled sadly. He was brave and stubborn and optimistic even when things were hard. His letters always focused on the good parts: the first successful harvest, the neighbors who helped him raise the barn, the incredible sunsets over the prairie. She paused. He never complained about being alone out here, but I think he was lonely. He kept asking me to visit, but I was working in the garment factory and could never save enough for the train fare. You are here now, Preston said gently. That would matter to him. They rode in companionable silence for a while, the prairie stretching out around them in gentle swells covered with new spring grass and the occasional burst of wildflowers. Katherine had never seen so much open space. Illinois had trees and towns and a sense of civilization pressing in from all sides. Here, the sky seemed impossibly vast, and the horizons went on forever. There, Preston said, pointing ahead where a collection of buildings came into view. That must be it. Katherine's heart clenched as she took in her father's homestead for the first time. The cabin was larger than she had expected, built from rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney rising from one end and real glass windows reflecting the afternoon sun. A barn stood about 50 yards away, and beyond that were fenced areas for animals and several acres of plowed fields waiting for spring planting. It was not grand, but it was solid and real evidence of years of hard work and determination. Preston pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin, and they sat there for a moment. Katherine could almost see her father walking out that door, wiping his hands on his work pants and calling out a greeting. The grief hit her fresh and sharp, stealing her breath. "Take your time," Preston said quietly, making no move to rush her. Katherine wiped her eyes and climbed down from the wagon with as much dignity as she could manage. The key her father's lawyer had given her felt heavy in her pocket. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, and immediately the space embraced her with her father's presence. The cabin was simple but well built, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, and a smaller bedroom off to one side. A loft above provided additional sleeping space accessible by a sturdy ladder. The furniture was rough, but carefully made: a table with 4 chairs, a rocking chair by the fireplace, shelves holding dishes and supplies. Everything was neat and organized exactly how her father had always kept his things. Preston came in behind her, carrying one of her trunks with apparent ease. He set it down gently and looked around. "Your father was a good builder. This is solid work. Where did you learn about building?" Katherine asked. "Growing up on a farm in Missouri, my father made sure all his sons knew how to work with wood and tools." Preston moved to the fireplace and examined the stonework. "This chimney is excellent. Drawing properly, no cracks. That is harder to do than it looks." Katherine walked slowly through the space, touching surfaces and feeling connected to her father through every piece of furniture he had built, every item he had chosen to keep in his home. In the bedroom, she found his clothes still hanging on pegs, his razor on a shelf, his Bible on a small table beside the bed. She would need to sort through everything, but not today. Today, she was too overwhelmed. "The loft can be mine," Preston called from the main room, apparently understanding without being told that Katherine would want the privacy of the bedroom. "I have slept in far worse places. This will be luxury." They spent the next hour unloading Katherine's trunks and establishing basic living arrangements. Preston proved immediately helpful, hauling water from the well, checking the barn and finding the 2 horses that had indeed been cared for by the neighbor, and generally acting like this was a normal situation rather than the bizarre circumstances it actually was. As the sun began to set, casting golden light through the windows, Preston started a fire in the stove and began preparing a simple meal from the supplies he had purchased in town. Katherine watched him move around the kitchen with easy competence and felt another wave of surreal disbelief. This morning she had been alone. Tonight she was sharing a home with a husband she had met hours ago. "Can I ask you something?" Katherine said as they sat down to a dinner of bacon, beans, and fresh bread from the Yankton bakery. "Of course," Preston said. "Why did you really offer to marry me?" There must be more to it than just being tired of cattle drives and wanting to help a stranger. Preston was quiet for a long moment, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. Finally, he set it down and met her eyes directly. "My sister Ellen went through something similar. Not exactly the same, but close enough. She married young, and her husband took her to Oregon to homestead. He died in an accident 2 years later, fell from a roof he was repairing. Ellen tried to keep the claim, but the local land agent refused to recognize her ownership. Said she needed a man to vouch for her, to take over the property. She was forced to marry her husband's brother just to keep the land she and her first husband had built together." "That is terrible," Katherine breathed. The brother was not a bad man, but Ellen did not love him. She did not choose him. She had to marry him out of desperation, and I know it made her miserable even though she never complained. Preston's jaw tightened. "I could not help my sister. By the time I heard about it, everything was already decided. But when I heard Thatcher dismissing you today, I thought maybe I could do something this time. Maybe I could be the man who helped instead of the man who took advantage." Katherine felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you," she said softly. "Truly. You may have saved my life today, or at least saved me from a very dark future." "We saved each other," Preston said. "I meant what I said about wanting to settle down. This arrangement benefits us both." They finished dinner in comfortable silence, and then Katherine cleaned the dishes while Preston checked the animals one more time before full darkness fell. The evening routine felt strange and domestic, like playing house, except everything was real and legally binding. When Preston climbed up to the loft with his bedroll and a few personal items, Katherine retired to the bedroom and changed into her nightgown, feeling self-conscious despite the solid door between them. She lay in her father's bed, her bed now, and stared at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person moving around above her, the creak of floorboards and rustle of blankets. She had married a stranger today, signed legal documents that bound their lives together. It was practical and necessary, but it was also insane. What if Preston turned out to be cruel or violent? What if he decided to take advantage of his legal position as her husband? Katherine had only his word and her instincts to reassure her, and while both seemed solid, she knew people could hide their true nature. "Miss Palmer," Preston's voice came from the main room, hesitant. "Are you still awake?" "Yes," Katherine called back. "I just wanted to say you are safe here. I know we do not know each other, and I know this whole situation is strange, but I give you my word that I will never hurt you or force anything. This arrangement is whatever we both agree it is, nothing more." Katherine felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "Thank you, Mr. Preston. That means a great deal. Just Preston is fine. Mr. Preston makes me feel like I should be wearing a suit and going to church." Despite everything, Katherine smiled into the darkness. "Then just Katherine is fine as well. Good night, Katherine." "Good night, Preston." Katherine lay awake long after she heard Preston's breathing even out into sleep above her. Through the window, stars blazed in patterns she had never seen in the city, and somewhere in the distance a coyote called out to the night. This was her life now, this cabin, this land, this unexpected partnership. It terrified her. But there was something else beneath the fear, something that felt almost like hope. Morning arrived with birdsong and sunlight slanting through the bedroom window. Katherine dressed quickly and emerged to find Preston already up, the stove warming the main room and coffee boiling in a pot. He had apparently raided the larder because the smell of frying eggs and cornbread filled the air. "You are a good cook," Katherine said, accepting the plate he offered. "Trail cooking teaches you to make something edible out of almost nothing," Preston said. "When you have actual ingredients, it is easy." He poured coffee into 2 tin cups and sat across from her at the table. "I was thinking we should spend today getting organized. Figure out what needs to be done, make a plan for the planting season, check all the equipment and structures." "That sounds practical," Katherine agreed. "I should warn you that I have absolutely no experience with farming. I can sow, keep house, manage accounts, but I have never planted a field in my life." "That is fine. I have enough farming experience for both of us. What we need to do first is assess what your father already planted and cared for, then determine what condition the soil is in for new planting." Preston leaned back in his chair. "This time of year in Dakota, we have a narrow window. Too early and a late frost kills everything. Too late and the growing season is too short. We need to make smart choices." They spent the morning exploring the property together. Preston examined the barn and declared it structurally sound, checked the plow and other equipment to see what needed repair, and walked the fields with the careful attention of someone who understood land and growing things. He explained what he was looking for: soil quality, drainage patterns, evidence of erosion or pest damage, and Katherine followed along, absorbing information like a student with an expert teacher. The neighboring homestead was about a quarter-mile to the east, and in the afternoon, a rider approached. He was an older man with weathered features and kind eyes, and he introduced himself as Dutch Mackenzie. "Heard you were Harrison's daughter," Dutch said, tipping his hat to Katherine. "I am real sorry for your loss. Your father was a good man and a good neighbor." "Thank you, Mr. Mackenzie," Katherine said. "I appreciate you looking after the horses." "No trouble at all." Dutch glanced at Preston with open curiosity. "Did not know Harrison's daughter was married." "Recent development," Preston said easily, offering his hand. "Porter Preston." "I am helping Katherine maintain the claim." Understanding flickered across Dutch's face, and he nodded slowly. "Smart move. Thatcher has been circling this property like a vulture, hoping to reassign it to one of his cronies. Good to see you outmaneuvered him." He turned back to Katherine. "If you folks need anything, just holler. My wife Martha would love to meet you. She was fond of Harrison and worried about what would happen to his place." "We would be honored to meet her," Katherine said warmly. After Dutch left, Katherine looked at Preston. Do you think everyone will assume we married for practical reasons rather than love? Preston shrugged. Probably. Does it matter? I suppose not, Katherine said slowly, though I imagine it will make for awkward social situations. Maybe at first. But if we work the land and contribute to the community, people will judge us on that rather than our unusual courtship. Preston smiled slightly. Besides, plenty of marriages out here start as practical arrangements. The frontier does not leave much room for long courtships and fancy romance. Over the following days, they fell into a working routine. Preston proved to be an invaluable partner, bringing skills and knowledge Katherine lacked. He repaired fences, serviced equipment, and began the crucial spring planting with Katherine as his assistant. She learned to handle seeds and plants, to understand spacing and depth, to read the sky for weather signs. Her hands blistered and her muscles ached, but she also felt a growing sense of accomplishment as the fields began to show the results of their labor. In the evenings, they would sit together after dinner and talk. Preston told stories about cattle drives, the characters he had worked with, the challenges they had faced, the vast landscapes they had crossed. Katherine shared memories of her father, painting pictures of his personality and dreams that made him come alive in the cabin he had built. Slowly, carefully, they were learning each other. Katherine found herself watching Preston when he did not notice the way he moved with quiet confidence, the gentleness he showed when handling the horses, the small kindnesses he offered without fanfare. He always gave her the better portion at meals. He repaired a loose floorboard in the bedroom without mentioning it. He brought her wildflowers once, just because he thought they were pretty. "You did not have to do that," Katherine said, touched by the gesture. "I know," Preston said. "I wanted to." One evening about 2 weeks after their sudden marriage, a spring storm rolled across the prairie with dramatic intensity. Thunder shook the cabin and lightning split the sky, illuminating everything in brilliant flashes. The rain hammered against the roof and windows, and the wind howled like something alive. Katherine sat in the rocking chair, trying to focus on the mending in her lap, but the storm made her nervous. In Illinois, she had always felt protected by buildings and neighbors pressed close. Here, the isolation made every crack of thunder feel personal. Preston came down from the loft without being asked and sat at the table nearby. He did not say anything, just offered his presence as reassurance. When a particularly violent flash of lightning made Katherine jump, he moved to sit on the floor beside the rocking chair. "Storms are worse on the trail," he said conversationally. "At least here we have solid walls and a roof. On a drive, you are just hoping the cattle do not spook and stampede." "That sounds terrifying," Katherine said. "It is. I have spent more than one night chasing panicked cattle through the darkness, praying my horse did not step in a hole and break both our necks." Preston stretched his long legs out in front of him. "This is much better. I will take a scary storm in a secure cabin over sleeping in the mud any day." His matter-of-fact tone helped settle Katherine's nerves. They sat together as the storm raged outside, and Katherine found herself noticing details about Preston, the way his hair curled when it got damp, the strong line of his jaw, the capable strength in his hands. He was a handsome man. She had noticed that from the beginning, but now she was noticing it differently, with a flutter in her stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. The storm passed eventually, leaving the air clean and fresh. Preston stood and stretched, then offered Katherine a hand up from the rocking chair. His palm was warm and rough against hers, and when she stood, they were suddenly very close in the small cabin. For a moment, neither moved. Katherine could see gold flecks in Preston's hazel eyes, could smell the faint scent of soap and leather that always clung to him. "Thank you for sitting with me," Katherine said softly. "Anytime," Preston replied, his voice lower than usual. His gaze dropped to her mouth for just a second before he stepped back, putting proper distance between them. "I should check on the animals, make sure the storm did not damage anything." He left quickly, and Katherine stood alone in the cabin with her heart racing. Something had shifted in that moment. The careful politeness they had maintained was beginning to crack, revealing something more complicated underneath. Spring gave way to early summer, and the homestead thrived under their combined efforts. The fields grew green with emerging crops. The garden Katherine planted near the house produced fresh vegetables, and the chickens Preston purchased at the Yankton market provided eggs. They worked side by side from dawn until dusk, and the physical labor built a comfortable familiarity between them. Dutch and Martha Mackenzie became regular visitors, and through them, Katherine and Preston met other neighboring homesteaders. There was an informal community spread across the prairie families who helped each other with large tasks, shared supplies in times of need, and gathered occasionally for social events. Katherine had worried about being judged for her unusual marriage, but most people seemed to accept them without question. Life on the frontier was too hard to waste time gossiping. One Saturday in late June, the Mackenzie family hosted a gathering to celebrate the end of planting season. Families came from homesteads within a several-mile radius, bringing food and musical instruments, and children who ran wild through the fields in packs. Katherine baked 2 pies from the precious dried apples in the larder, and Preston helped her load them carefully into the wagon for the short trip to the Mackenzie place. The party was already in full swing when they arrived. Long tables had been set up in the yard, laden with food that spoke of pioneer ingenuity: venison and rabbit, cornbread and biscuits, preserved fruits and fresh greens, simple cakes and pies. A fiddler was playing lively tunes while people danced in the grass, laughing and clapping. Martha Mackenzie descended on Katherine immediately, pulling her into the cluster of women who were arranging food and sharing gossip. They welcomed Katherine with genuine warmth, asking about the homestead and praising Harrison Palmer's character and work ethic. Katherine found herself relaxing, enjoying the female company after weeks with only Preston for conversation. Meanwhile, Preston had been pulled into a group of men discussing crop prospects and the political situation in Washington. Katherine watched him from across the yard, noting how easily he fit in, how the other men seemed to respect him despite his newcomer status. He caught her looking and smiled, a private expression just for her that made her stomach flip pleasantly. As the sun began to set, the fiddler started playing slower tunes and couples began to dance more formally. Dutch grabbed Martha and spun her around despite her laughing protests about being too old for such nonsense. Other couples joined in, moving through the simple patterns of frontier dances. Preston appeared at Katherine's elbow. "Would you like to dance?" Katherine's heart jumped. They had barely touched since the night of the storm, both of them maintaining careful distance. Dancing meant holding each other, moving together, crossing the unspoken boundary they had established. "I would like that," Katherine said. Preston led her to the makeshift dance area and placed one hand properly at her waist, taking her hand in his other. They began to move to the music, and Katherine was surprised by how naturally Preston led, how smoothly they moved together despite never having danced before. His hand at her waist was warm through the fabric of her dress, and she could feel the strength in his frame, the careful control of his movements. "Where did a cowboy learn to dance?" Katherine asked, slightly breathless. "My mother insisted all her sons learn," Preston said. She said rough work was no excuse for rough manners. His thumb moved slightly against her waist, a subtle caress that sent heat racing through Katherine's body. I am glad she insisted. They danced 3 songs in succession, neither suggesting they stop, neither wanting to break the connection. Other couples swirled around them, but Katherine was aware only of Preston, his eyes on hers, his hand holding hers, the way their bodies moved in perfect rhythm. This was not the careful partnership they had maintained. This was something more, something building between them whether they acknowledged it or not. When the music finally ended and they separated, Katherine felt the loss of his touch like a physical ache. They gathered their empty pie tins and said their goodbyes, loading into the wagon for the short ride home under a canopy of stars so thick they looked like glowing dust scattered across black velvet. "I enjoyed tonight," Katherine said as Preston guided the horses along the familiar track toward their cabin. "So did I," Preston agreed. "You are a wonderful dancer." "So are you." Katherine hesitated, then decided to risk honesty. "It was nice to touch you." "We have been very careful not to do that." Preston was quiet for a long moment. "Yes, we have been careful. I thought that was what you wanted." "It was," Katherine said slowly. "At first, I needed to know you were trustworthy, that you would respect the boundaries we set." She looked at his profile in the moonlight. "But things feel different now. We are not strangers anymore." Preston pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the cabin but made no move to get down. "What are you saying, Katherine?" She took a breath, committing to the truth. "I am saying that this marriage started as a legal arrangement, but I do not want it to stay that way. Somewhere along the way I started to care for you, and I hope you might feel the same." Preston turned to face her fully, his expression intense in the starlight. "I have felt that way for weeks," he said roughly, "but I did not want to pressure you or make you feel obligated. You married me out of desperation, not choice. I did not want you to think you owed me anything beyond partnership." "You are not pressuring me," Katherine said firmly. "I am choosing this. I am choosing you." She reached out and touched his face, feeling the slight roughness of stubble under her palm. "If you want me to." Preston covered her hand with his, pressing it against his cheek. "I want you so much it is driving me crazy. Sleeping above you every night, working beside you every day, watching you become part of this place, part of my life. Katherine, you are extraordinary. You are brave and strong and beautiful, and I think I started falling in love with you the moment you squared your shoulders and walked back into Thatcher's office to claim what was yours." Tears pricked Katherine's eyes. "You love me." "Yes," Preston said simply. "I know it is fast and strange and probably too soon to say it, but yes, I love you." Katherine leaned forward and kissed him. It was tentative at first, a question more than a statement, but when Preston responded with gentle intensity, pulling her closer and deepening the kiss, Katherine felt something unlock inside her chest. This was what she had been wanting without fully admitting it, this connection, this desire, this love that had grown from unlikely circumstances into something real and true. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Preston rested his forehead against hers. "We should go inside," he said hoarsely. "Yes," Katherine agreed. "We should." They climbed down from the wagon with more speed than grace, Preston tending to the horses while Katherine went into the cabin and lit the lamps with shaking hands. She removed her shawl and stood in the middle of the main room, her heart pounding. She heard Preston come in behind her, the door closing, his footsteps across the wooden floor. "Katherine," he said, his voice rough with want and restraint. "Are you certain?" She turned to face him. "I am certain. I want this marriage to be real in every way. I want you." Preston crossed the space between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with an intensity that made her knees weak. Katherine clung to him, returning the passion with equal fervor. Years of loneliness and recent grief transforming into a desperate need for connection and life. They stumbled together toward the bedroom, shedding clothes between kisses, learning each other's bodies with hands and mouths and whispered words. Making love with Preston was everything Katherine had not known to want: tender and passionate, playful and serious. A conversation without words that spoke of trust and desire and deep affection. He was careful with her, aware of her inexperience, making sure she found pleasure even as he found his own. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed that had been her father's and was now theirs, skin cooling in the night air, hearts gradually slowing. "I love you too," Katherine whispered into the darkness. "I did not say it before, but I do. I love you, Preston." His arms tightened around her. "Say it again." "I love you." She kissed his chest, felt his heart beating strong beneath her lips. "I love you, I love you, I love you." Preston rolled them so he was looking down at her, his eyes reflecting the faint starlight from the window. "This was not at all how I expected my life to go, but I would not change a single thing if it meant not having you. Even the part where you married a complete stranger," Katherine teased. "Especially that part." Preston kissed her softly. "Best impulsive decision I ever made." They made love again, slowly this time, savoring each touch and sensation. And when they finally slept, it was wrapped in each other's arms, no longer separated by floors and walls and careful distance. The summer passed in a blur of work and growing intimacy. Katherine and Preston operated as a true partnership now, sharing not just labor but affection, conversation, and physical love. The crops grew tall and strong, promising a good harvest. The animals thrived. The cabin became a real home, filled with laughter and domestic routines that spoke of permanence. Katherine proved to have a talent for managing the practical aspects of the homestead, keeping accounts, planning meals to stretch supplies, preserving food for winter. Preston brought the physical strength and farming knowledge that kept the land productive. Together, they created something neither could have managed alone. In late July, Katherine realized her monthly bleeding had not arrived on schedule. She waited, not wanting to say anything until she was certain, but when another week passed and she began to feel nauseated in the mornings, she knew. She was carrying Preston's child. The knowledge filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. They had been married only 4 months, and while their relationship had deepened into genuine love, a baby would change everything. Could they manage with a child? Was the homestead stable enough? What if something went wrong? She told Preston one evening after dinner, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I need to tell you something, and I do not know how you will feel about it." Preston looked up from the harness he was mending, his expression immediately concerned. "What is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong exactly. I am just surprised, and I hope you will be happy, but I understand if you are worried." Katherine took a breath. "I am pregnant." Preston stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then a smile spread slowly across his features, transforming into outright joy. He dropped the harness and crossed to her, pulling her up into his arms and spinning her around. "You are pregnant," he said wonderingly, setting her down carefully as though she might break. "We are going to have a baby." "You are happy?" Katherine asked, relief flooding through her. "Happy." "Katherine, I am beyond happy. This is incredible." Preston placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "A child, our child." His eyes met hers, suddenly serious. "Are you happy? Is this what you want?" "Yes," Katherine said firmly. "I was scared to tell you because it is so soon, but yes, I want this baby. I want our family." Preston kissed her tenderly. "Then we will make it work. We will prepare and plan and build a life for our child, together." They told the Mackenzies the news a few weeks later, and Martha immediately took Katherine under her wing with advice and practical help. The other women in the community rallied around as well, sharing wisdom about pregnancy and childbirth on the frontier. It was dangerous. They did not pretend otherwise, but they also provided reassurance through their own survival stories and promises of support when Katherine's time came. Preston threw himself into preparing the cabin for a baby. He built a beautiful cradle from smooth pine, working by lamplight after long days in the fields. He reinforced the cabin walls with additional insulation for winter. He hunted and preserved extra meat, stocked up on supplies during trips to Yankton, and generally acted like a man preparing for the most important event of his life. The harvest that fall was abundant, proving that Katherine's father had chosen good land and that Preston's farming knowledge had been well applied. They sold their surplus crops in Yankton for a good price, giving them financial security heading into winter. Katherine's pregnancy progressed normally, her body changing and swelling with new life. As winter closed in and the prairie turned white with snow, Katherine and Preston settled into a different rhythm. The outdoor work slowed, leaving more time for indoor tasks and quiet evenings together. Preston would sit with Katherine in the rocking chair, his hand on her belly feeling the baby kick and move. They talked about names, about their hopes for the child, about the future they were building. "You ever regret it?" Katherine asked one snowy evening as they lay in bed. Preston spooned behind her with his hand resting on her rounded stomach. "Giving up the cattle drives and open trail for domestic life. Not for a single second," Preston said firmly. "That life was just killing time until I found this." "Until I found you." He kissed her shoulder. "I spent years drifting, thinking I wanted freedom and adventure, but what I really wanted was exactly this: a home, a partner, a purpose beyond the next horizon." "I am glad you were standing outside that land office window," Katherine said softly. "I am glad you were brave enough to offer what you did. You saved me, Preston, in every way that matters." "We saved each other," Preston corrected. "You gave me a reason to stop running." Katherine's labor began on a frigid February morning with snow piled high outside and wind howling across the prairie. Martha Mackenzie arrived with 2 other experienced women, and they took over the cabin with calm efficiency while Preston was banished outside despite his protests. He paced in the barn, listening to the sounds coming from the cabin, feeling utterly helpless for the first time in his adult life. The labor lasted 14 hours. Katherine was strong and brave, but childbirth was a brutal process that pushed her to the absolute limits of her endurance. When she finally delivered a healthy baby boy just after midnight, her screams of pain transformed into cries of joy. Preston heard the baby's first wail from the barn and felt tears stream down his face in relief. Martha came to get him a half-hour later, her face wreathed in smiles. "You have a son, Preston. A big, healthy, beautiful boy, and Katherine is tired but doing well." Preston practically ran to the cabin. Katherine lay in their bed looking exhausted and radiant simultaneously, her hair damp with sweat and her face glowing with happiness. In her arms was a small bundle wrapped in soft blankets, and when Preston approached carefully, she pulled back the fabric to reveal the perfect tiny face of their son. "He is beautiful," Preston breathed, sinking to his knees beside the bed. "You are beautiful. You are both incredible." "Would you like to hold your son?" Katherine asked. Preston took the baby with terrified gentleness, cradling the impossibly small form against his chest. The infant squirmed and made soft sounds, his tiny hand escaping the blanket to curl reflexively. Preston felt something shift fundamentally inside him, a fierce protective love unlike anything he had ever experienced. "Hello there, little man," Preston whispered. "I am your father. I am going to keep you safe and teach you everything I know and love you every day of your life." "What should we name him?" Katherine asked, her voice drowsy but content. They had discussed names endlessly but never quite decided. Now, looking at their son, Preston knew. "Patrick," he said, "after my father. Patrick Harrison Preston, for both our fathers." "Patrick," Katherine repeated, testing the name. "Yes, that is perfect." They named him Patrick Harrison Preston, and he became the center of their universe. Preston proved to be a devoted father, tending to his son with the same careful attention he gave to everything he truly cared about. Katherine recovered from the birth slowly but surely, her body healing while her heart expanded to accommodate the overwhelming love she felt for this tiny person they had created. Spring returned to the prairie, melting the snow and bringing new green growth. Preston prepared the fields for planting while Katherine kept Patrick in a sling against her chest, the baby sleeping peacefully to the rhythm of her movements. Life fell into a new pattern, harder in some ways with a baby requiring constant attention, but richer and fuller than before. Patrick was an easy baby, content to sleep or observe the world with solemn eyes that were beginning to shift from newborn blue to the hazel green of his father's. As he grew, his personality emerged curious and sweet-natured, laughing easily at Preston's silly faces, cuddling happily against Katherine's chest. On a warm day in May, nearly a year after Katherine had first arrived in Yankton, they held a small celebration at the homestead. Dutch and Martha came, along with several other neighboring families and their children. They roasted a pig Preston had purchased specially for the occasion, and everyone contributed food and music to the gathering. As Katherine watched Preston play with Patrick in the spring sunshine, tossing the baby gently in the air and catching him while Patrick shrieked with delighted laughter, she felt profound gratitude for the strange series of events that had brought them together. She thought of her father and hoped he could see what had become of his homestead, how his sacrifice and hard work had created the foundation for a real family legacy. "Your father would be proud," Martha said quietly, coming to stand beside Katherine with a knowing look. "Seeing what you have built here, how you have honored his memory." "I hope so," Katherine said, "though I think he would have been shocked at how it happened." Martha laughed. "Life on the frontier rarely follows expected paths. But the results are what matter, and this," she gestured to the scene before them, the happy families gathered on thriving land. "This is good. This is what we are all working toward." That night, after their guests had departed and Patrick was sleeping soundly in his cradle, Katherine and Preston sat together on the porch they had built earlier that spring. The prairie stretched out before them in the moonlight, peaceful and vast and full of promise. "I have been thinking," Preston said, his arm around Katherine's shoulders, "about expanding. Maybe getting some cattle, building up a small herd. Dutch mentioned that some of his neighbors are interested in going in together on a cooperative grazing arrangement." "That sounds ambitious," Katherine said, "but possible. We had a good harvest last year, and if this year is equally successful, we could invest the profits." "We would need to hire help eventually," Preston continued. "I am only one man, and with Patrick growing, you will have your hands full. But I think we could do it. Build something even bigger than what your father started." Katherine leaned her head against Preston's shoulder, feeling utterly content. "I trust your judgment. Whatever we do, we will do it together." Preston kissed the top of her head. "Partners," he said. "Partners," Katherine agreed, "and so much more than that." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge one by one across the enormous Dakota sky. The future stretched out before them, uncertain in details but secure in the fundamentals. They had land. They had each other. They had a son to raise and dreams to pursue. From Katherine's desperate moment outside the land office to this peaceful evening on their porch, the journey had been strange and unexpected. But every step had led them exactly where they were meant to be. The years that followed brought both challenges and triumphs, as all lives do. Some summers were too dry, and they watched crops wither despite their best efforts. Some winters were brutal, testing their endurance and their resources. But Katherine and Preston faced everything side by side, their partnership growing stronger through adversity. They did expand, carefully and intelligently, adding cattle to their operation, and eventually becoming known throughout the region as savvy ranchers as well as good farmers. Preston's experience from the cattle drives proved invaluable in this new venture, and Katherine's talent for managing money and planning ensured they remained profitable even in difficult years. Patrick grew into a bright, active boy who loved following his father around the homestead and asking endless questions about everything. When he was 3, Katherine became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy felt easier because she knew what to expect, and when she delivered a healthy daughter on a crisp October morning, their family felt complete. They named her Caroline Ruth Preston, and she had Katherine's dark hair and Preston's hazel eyes, and a personality that announced itself from day one, fierce and demanding and utterly beloved. Patrick took to being a big brother with surprising gentleness, helping his mother care for his baby sister and announcing proudly to anyone who would listen that he had a sister now. The homestead that Harrison Palmer had carved from raw prairie land became a thriving ranch that employed several workers and provided good livings for multiple families. Katherine and Preston built a larger house, though they kept the original cabin standing as a reminder of where they had started. The community around them grew as well, with Yankton expanding from territorial capital into a proper established town, and more homesteaders claiming land throughout the region. On a summer evening when Patrick was 7 and Caroline was 4, the family sat together on the wide porch of their expanded home, watching the sun set over their land. Preston held Caroline in his lap while Patrick practiced reading aloud from a McGuffey reader, his small face serious with concentration. "Remember when this was just a crazy idea," Katherine said softly to Preston. Two strangers standing outside a land office, deciding to risk everything on each other. "Best crazy idea ever," Preston said with a grin. "Though I will admit, I was terrified you would change your mind halfway to the courthouse. I was terrified you were secretly a criminal or a madman," Katherine admitted with a laugh. "But my instincts told me you were trustworthy, and thank God I listened." Preston reached over Patrick's head to take Katherine's hand. "I love you," he said simply. "Just as much now as I did that first night when I realized I was falling for my own wife." "I love you too," Katherine said. "Always." Patrick looked up from his book with the solemn wisdom of a 7-year-old. "You two are always saying mushy things." "That is because we are in love," Preston explained. "Someday when you are older, you will understand." "I already understand," Patrick announced. "It means you like kissing all the time." Caroline giggled at that, and Katherine and Preston exchanged amused glances over their children's heads. This was their life now, domestic and sweet, full of small moments that added up to lasting happiness. Not perfect, because nothing ever was, but good and real and deeply satisfying. Years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of planting and harvest, births and deaths in the community, children growing and lives changing. Patrick eventually went to the territorial school that opened in Yankton, returning each day with new knowledge and endless stories. Caroline proved to be as strong-willed as her mother, and as patient as her father, a combination that would serve her well in whatever future she chose. Katherine sometimes thought about that terrified young woman who had stood in the land office, watching her entire future crumble because of an unjust law and a cruel bureaucrat. She was grateful to that younger self for being brave enough to accept Preston's wild offer, for taking a chance when everything felt hopeless. That single moment of courage had led to all of this, the life she lived now, full of love and family and purpose. Preston had his own moments of reflection, thinking about the restless cowboy he had been, always chasing the next trail without understanding what he was really searching for. He had thought he wanted freedom and adventure, but what he actually wanted was exactly what he had now: roots and responsibility, and a reason to stay in one place. Katherine and their children gave him that, along with a love so deep it sometimes took his breath away. One evening when Patrick was 12 and Caroline was 9, Preston took his family to visit Harrison Palmer's grave on a hill overlooking the homestead. They had marked it with a proper stone, carved with his name and dates, and the simple phrase, "He built something that lasted." "Tell us about grandfather again," Caroline requested, as she often did. Katherine knelt beside the grave and brushed away leaves, her children settling on either side of her while Preston stood behind them, his hands on Katherine's shoulders. "He was brave and determined," Katherine said. "He saw an opportunity for a better life and seized it, even though it was difficult and scary. He worked this land with his own hands and built the foundation for everything we have now. He would be proud of you both," Preston added, addressing his children. "Proud of how hard you work, how kind you are, how well you are growing up." "You think he can see us?" Patrick asked, looking at the stone with the serious expression he wore when contemplating big questions. "I like to think so," Katherine said softly. "I like to believe he knows what happened after he died, how he kept his dream alive and made it even bigger than he imagined." They stood together in the golden evening light, 4 people connected by blood and love and the land beneath their feet. The prairie wind moved through the grass with a sound like whispered conversations, and somewhere a meadowlark sang its evening song. It was peaceful and perfect, a moment of pure contentment. That night, after the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Katherine and Preston lay together in their bed and talked about the future. Patrick was showing interest in the cattle operation, following his father everywhere, and asking to learn everything about ranching. Caroline had announced her intention to become a teacher like the one at the territorial school, and neither parent doubted she would achieve exactly that. "We did well," Preston said, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on Katherine's arm. "This life we built, these children we are raising." "All of it. We did," Katherine agreed, "though I think we had considerable help from luck and timing and each other." Preston chuckled. "Definitely each other. I could not have done any of this without you, nor I without you." Katherine turned in his arms to face him directly. "You stood beside me when I had nothing and no one. You gave me hope when I was desperate. You became my partner and my love and the father of my children. I cannot imagine my life without you in it." "You will never have to," Preston promised, kissing her softly. "We are in this together, all the way to the end." They made love with the comfortable intimacy of long marriage, slow and sweet and satisfying. And when they finally slept, it was wrapped together as they had been for years now. 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the ruins of despair. More years passed, bringing changes and challenges as always. South Dakota achieved statehood in 1889, transforming from territory to a full member of the Union. The frontier that Katherine and Preston had known slowly disappeared as more settlers arrived. Towns expanded, and railroads connected previously isolated communities. The wild, open feeling of the early homesteading days gave way to something more established and civilized. Patrick grew into a young man who combined his father's practical skills with his mother's intelligence, taking on more responsibility for the ranch operation each year. When he was 20, he married a schoolteacher named Emma from Yankton, and they built a house on the eastern edge of the Preston property. A year later, they made Katherine and Preston grandparents with the birth of a son they named Harrison, continuing the family legacy. Caroline proved every bit as determined as her childhood declarations suggested. She attended normal school in Yankton and became a teacher at age 18, working at the same school she had once attended as a student. She was fierce and passionate about education, fighting to ensure even the children from the poorest homesteads received quality instruction. Katherine and Preston watched their children build their own lives with pride and some wistfulness, remembering when Patrick and Caroline were small and the house was full of noise and chaos. But the quiet that came with grown children also brought a different kind of peace, a chance to focus on each other again after years of putting children first. "We should take a trip," Preston suggested one spring morning over breakfast. They were in their 50s now, with silver threading through their hair and lines carved into their faces by decades of sun and wind and laughter. "Go somewhere we have never been. See something new." "Like where?" Katherine asked, intrigued by the idea. "California, maybe. See the Pacific Ocean." "Patrick can manage the ranch for a few months, and Caroline is settled in her teaching. This might be our chance." They did take that trip, traveling by train across the country in a journey that would have been impossible during their early homesteading days. They saw mountains and deserts, big cities and small towns, and finally the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean stretching to the horizon. It was wonderful and exciting, but when they returned to South Dakota, Katherine felt her soul settle back into place. This was home. This was where she belonged. "We saw the ocean," Preston said as they stood on their porch looking out over familiar prairie land. "It was beautiful." "It was," Katherine agreed, "but this is better. This is ours." Preston pulled her close, his arm around her waist in a gesture that had become habit over more than 2 decades of marriage. "I never get tired of this view. Not just the land, though that is magnificent, but standing here with you, watching the sunset, knowing everything we built together. That never gets old." "Never," Katherine agreed softly. They stood together as the sun sank toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. The homestead that had started as a desperate solution to an unjust law had become a thriving ranch, a family legacy, a testament to the power of partnership and love. Katherine thought about all the twists and turns that had brought her here: her father's death, the cruel settlement agent, Preston's unexpected offer, the wedding that changed everything. If someone had told that terrified 23-year-old woman standing outside the land office that she would end up with a life like this, she never would have believed it. But here she was, decades later, still standing beside the cowboy who had said, "I'm here now," and meant it. Who had kept that promise every single day since. "What are you thinking about?" Preston asked, reading her contemplative mood. "Just remembering," Katherine said. "That first day, how scared I was, how brave you were." "We were both brave," Preston corrected gently. "You took a huge risk trusting me. I took a huge risk offering what I did. We were brave together." "And we have been ever since," Katherine said. "Partners in everything." "Always," Preston agreed. The sun completed its descent, leaving the prairie bathed in twilight. In the distance, lights appeared in Patrick and Emma's house as they settled in for the evening with their young family. Somewhere across the ranch, cattle lowed their evening songs. The wind moved through the grass with its eternal whisper. Everything was as it should be. Katherine and Preston went inside their home, the house they had expanded and improved over the years, but which still contained the original cabin at its heart, a reminder of humble beginnings and hard-won victories. They moved through their evening routine with the comfortable synchronization of long partnership, each anticipating the other's needs and movements. Later, lying in bed with Preston's arm around her, and his steady breathing indicating he was nearly asleep, Katherine felt profound gratitude wash over her. Life had given her challenges and sorrows, particularly losing her father before he could see what became of his homestead. But life had also given her Preston, their children and grandchildren, this land they had built together, and decades of love that had only deepened with time. "Preston," she whispered. He murmured sleepily. "Thank you for standing beside me, for being here, for everything." Preston's arm tightened around her. "Thank you for letting me, for taking a chance on a stranger with a crazy idea." "Best decision I ever made," Katherine said. "Second best," Preston corrected with a soft chuckle. "The best decision was walking back into Thatcher's office and claiming what was yours. I just helped with that." Katherine smiled into the darkness. "We helped each other. That is what we do." "That is what we do," Preston agreed. "Always." They drifted into sleep together. Two people who had faced down an unjust system, and one who had built a life from nothing but determination and partnership, who had found love in the most unexpected circumstances and nurtured it into something that lasted. The prairie wind sang them to sleep, and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns, and the land they had worked so hard to keep spread out around them, solid and real and theirs. Years continued their inevitable march. Katherine and Preston grew older, their bodies slowing but their minds sharp and their love undimmed. More grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with noise and laughter during family gatherings. Patrick proved himself a capable rancher, taking over more of the daily operations as Preston gradually stepped back. Caroline married a fellow teacher and continued her passionate work in education, though she never moved far from the homestead. Preston's health began to fail in his late 60s, a gradual decline that frustrated him but which he faced with characteristic stoicism. Katherine nursed him through pneumonia one terrible winter, sitting beside his bed and refusing to consider a world without him in it. He recovered, though not completely, and they both understood that time was becoming precious in a way it had not been before. "I need you to know something," Preston said one quiet afternoon as they sat together on the porch, wrapped in blankets against the autumn chill. "Everything good in my life came from that day I stood outside the land office and heard you fighting for what was yours. You gave me purpose and love and a reason to become the man I wanted to be. I would not trade a single day of our life together, not even the hard ones." Katherine's eyes filled with tears. "I feel the same. You saved me, Preston, in every way possible, and you loved me so well for so long. I have been blessed beyond measure." "We blessed each other," Preston said, taking her hand in his. They sat in companionable silence, watching their land stretch into the distance under the big Dakota sky. Preston passed peacefully in his sleep on a cold February night in 1904, with Katherine holding his hand and their children gathered around him. He was 69 years old, and he had lived to see the turn of the century, the transformation of wild frontier into settled civilization, and the establishment of a family legacy that would continue long after he was gone. Katherine mourned him deeply, as did everyone who had known him. They buried him on the hill beside Harrison Palmer, two men who had never met in life but who were connected through the woman they both loved. The entire community attended the funeral, testament to the respect Preston had earned through decades of honest work and good character. In the months after Preston's death, Katherine thought often about their unlikely beginning. The desperate young woman and the wandering cowboy who had taken a chance on each other had built something extraordinary. She missed him with an ache that never fully disappeared, but she also felt grateful for every moment they had shared. Katherine lived another 12 years after Preston's death, remaining sharp and engaged until the end. She watched her grandchildren grow and her great-grandchildren arrive. She saw automobiles replace horses and wagons, electricity come to rural areas, and the world change in ways she could never have imagined as a young woman arriving in Yankton by stagecoach. When Katherine Palmer Preston died in her sleep at age 81, she was buried beside Preston on the hill overlooking the homestead her father had claimed, and she had fought to keep. Their graves stood side by side, two people who had stood beside each other in life, continuing that partnership in death. Patrick and Caroline ensured the homestead remained in the family, passing through generations along with the story of how it was saved. The tale of the settlement agent who denied Katherine's claim and the cowboy who stood beside her and said, "I'm here now," became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren as an example of courage, partnership, and love. The original cabin where Katherine and Preston had begun, their married life was preserved carefully, maintained by generations of Preston descendants as a reminder of where the family story truly started. Visitors would stand in that small space and try to imagine two strangers beginning a life together there, building trust and then love from the foundation of a desperate arrangement. The land itself thrived through the decades, managed well by people who understood its value not just as property, but as legacy. The wheat and corn that Harrison Palmer had first planted continued to grow each spring, sustained by the water from the same well he had dug by hand, sheltered by windbreaks his daughter and her husband had planted together. And on quiet evenings when the wind moved across the prairie in that particular way it had, carrying the scent of grass and earth and possibility, family members would sometimes swear they could feel the presence of those who came before Harrison Palmer with his determined dreams, Katherine with her fierce courage, and Preston with his steady strength. Three people who had transformed raw land into home, who had faced injustice and hardship, and one who had built something that truly lasted. The story of Katherine and Preston became more than just family history. It became a reminder that love can grow from the strangest beginnings, that partnership and respect form the strongest foundations, that courage means different things at different times. Sometimes courage is leaving everything familiar to start fresh on the frontier. Sometimes it is standing up for what is rightfully yours against those who would deny it. And sometimes courage is offering your help to a stranger and trusting that together you might build something neither could achieve alone. Their love story played out against the backdrop of the American frontier, in a time when the country was still defining itself and people had to be strong and resourceful to survive. But the core of their story, two people choosing each other, building trust into love, facing life's challenges as partners, that was timeless. That was the part that resonated through generations, inspiring others to believe in the possibility of finding love in unexpected places and building lasting happiness from difficult circumstances. The homestead that Katherine Palmer had nearly lost, that Porter Preston had helped her save, that they had expanded and improved together over decades of marriage, stood as physical proof of what they had accomplished. Barns and fences, fields and pastures, the expanded house with the original cabin at its heart, all of it testified to their partnership, their love, and their commitment to building something meaningful that would outlast them both. And so the story ended where it began, with the land. The Dakota prairie that had witnessed Harrison Palmer's arrival and hard work, Katherine's desperate stand, Preston's generous offer, and decades of love and family and life. The land remained, as it always would, carrying within its soil the memory of all who had walked upon it, worked it, loved it, and called it home.